I still remember that night. The rain was pounding against the windows, thunder cracking like the heavens were angry, and I was sitting in my living room, staring at the man I once welcomed into my family, my son-in-law. He stood there, thinking he was clever, thinking I was old and weak. He believed I wouldn't see through his little act. But oh, I saw everything. The moment his greedy eyes wandered over my safe, the way his fingers tapped nervously against his pocket. He thought he could rob me. Me. The man who raised his daughter when no one else would. The man who sacrificed every piece of himself just so she could have a better life. He thought he was stealing from a broken old man. But what he didn't know was that he was walking straight into the biggest mistake of his life. Because I had already seen betrayal before, I had already buried trust, love, and loyalty in shallow graves. And I promised myself long ago that if anyone ever tried to break me again, I wouldn't sit quietly. So when my daughter's husband thought robbing me was a good idea, I let him. I let him walk right into my trap. And by the end of it all, he wasn't the one who had taken something from me. No, I was the one who took everything from him. Before all of this, before the betrayal, before the whispers and the greed, I was just a father, a man who worked with his hands, who carried both bricks and burdens on his shoulders. My name wasn't written in any history books, but my sacrifices were carved into every wrinkle on my face. When my wife passed away, the world felt like it had collapsed. Aisha was only 8 then, a little girl with tears too heavy for her age. I remember sitting beside her on cold nights, holding her close, telling her stories I made up just so she could fall asleep without crying. I promised her, with my hand on her head, that I would be both her father and her mother. Life wasn't kind after that. I worked construction sites by day, warehouses by night. There were times when my hands bled through my gloves, but I smiled at her when I came home, hiding the pain so she wouldn't worry. Some nights I would eat only half a roti, telling her I'd already eaten at work, just so she could have more. I sold the small gold bangles my wife had left behind to buy Aisha her first school uniform. I still remember her face glowing with pride that morning. She didn't know the cost, but I did. When she needed books for her exams, I pawned my watch. When she dreamed of studying abroad, I sold the piece of land my father had left me. That land was my bloodline, my roots, but my daughter's dreams meant more. There were days when loneliness ate at me like rust. After long shifts, I'd sit in silence, staring at the empty chair across from me at the dinner table. I'd imagine my wife smiling at me, telling me I was doing well. Those quiet conversations with her ghost kept me alive. But there were joys, too. The first time Aisha won a school prize, I clapped until my hands hurt. The way she would run to me with her report card shouting, "Abu, I did it." Those were the moments that made the hunger, the exhaustion, the sacrifices worth it. Even at her wedding, when I gave away everything I had, my savings, my strength, my tears, I wasn't sad. I thought I had fulfilled my duty. I thought I had given her the wings to fly. I never cared for myself much. My clothes were patched, my shoes worn thin, but Aisha always had the best I could afford. If there was only one seat in comfort, it was hers. If there was only one chance, it belonged to her. You see, my life was built on sacrifice. Every brick of our little house was laid with my sweat. Every meal we ate was pulled from my aching back, and I never regretted a moment of it. All I wanted was for my daughter to be happy, safe, and loved. That was my only prayer, whispered every night before sleep. But I never imagined that the man she chose to share her life with would one day try to rob me of everything I had left. The betrayal didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It came as a dozen small, poisonous things that added up until I could no longer breathe. At first it was the missing phone calls. Aisha's voice, once full of chatter and questions about my day, became short and measured. "We're busy, Abu," she'd say, and then the silence would follow like a curtain falling. Then came the little changes that sting more than the big ones. Her laughter didn't reach my ears at family gatherings. She stopped asking if I'd eaten. She began to make plans without me. I remember the night I noticed a new set of keys on the hook, keys that didn't belong to any of our locks. I asked about them, and she smiled, quick and guilty. "It's for the new apartment, Abu. We're trying to be independent." Independence from me, it turned out. There were withdrawals from our joint account that never had explanations. Bills paid that I hadn't authorized. A new watch on Danielle's wrist that gleamed like a small insult. Little things. Each oa. A needle. My first real shock was a whisper, overheard through a half-open door. I had been passing the living room and they were talking low, the kind of conversation that drops a stone into clear water and only later do you see the ripples. Danielle's voice was calm, deliberate. "He's stubborn, but he keeps money in that safe. When I get it, we'll be set." Aisha's answer was softer, and it was the sound that killed me more than his words. "He's still my father." Daniel's chuckle was patient and cruel. "Yes, but a father can be a burden. You'll thank me later." I stood frozen, the mug in my hand cooling as my skin went cold. Shock hit first, a physical clamp across my chest. I couldn't believe the daughter I had raised would let someone speak of me like I was trash. I walked in then, because I could not let them wrap their whispers into my home without hearing my name. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted. Danielle looked up with that practiced smile. "Just discussing future plans, Abu, for Aisha and the children." She didn't look at me. She pretended the conversation was a stain she hadn't noticed. That blankness, that refusal to meet my eyes, felt like abandonment. Sadness came next, a slow, aching weight. I remember thinking of every sleepless night, every extra shift, every time I'd given up my small comforts for her. How could she trade those memories for a new life that started with deceit? Disbelief lingered. I replayed the words. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe they were joking. But the new keys, the payments, the watch, proof stacked like accusations. The first time he crossed the line into outright disrespect was subtle and then savage. At a small family dinner, he said, loud enough for neighbors to hear, "You should think about transferring the house to Aisha. Old men forget." He laughed as if he'd said something witty. The humilia. Tayan burned in my face. I felt the room tilt. I felt the neighbors' eyes on me, the gossip beginning like a slow burn. A daughter who wouldn't speak up for her father. That pain split me open. I tried to speak, to remind them of the land I sold for her tuition, the nights I went hungry so she could eat. Aisha's hand tightened in Danielle's, and she said sharply, "Abu, you don't need to make a scene." Her words were a blade. Anger rose like hot bile. At first it was quiet and controlled, a coiled thing behind my ribs, but every calculated slight fed it. The day I saw him stand by my study door at midnight, fingers hovering like a surgeon's over my safe's dial, my anger snapped into a hard, merciless clarity. He didn't bother to hide his greed. When I caught him, he tried to make light of it. "I was just checking if you needed help with the locks, Abu," he said, voice slick. "Help?" I echoed. The word tasted false. "You called my house a burden last week." He smiled like a man who didn't care if I felt the sting. "Sometimes honesty is blunt, Abu. We're doing what's best for our family." That was the moment disbelief curdled into fury. The betrayal wasn't only that he planned to take from me, it was that my own blood stood silent, that my daughter's love had turned into complicity. I remember the room closing in, the quiet of the house, the hidden clock ticking, my hands trembling. My heart punched the inside of my ribs, as if to wake me from a dream where I'd been invited to watch my own erasure. Every memory of sacrifice flashed through me. Pawning my watch for her books, selling my patch of land for her ticket to a better world, sitting through her wedding feeling both proud and empty. The realization that those things had been transactions to someone else made my blood run ice-cold. Humiliation bloomed into a hard, strategic rage. I forced myself to breathe, to Mia, sure each word, because beneath the raw pain there was a new thing: resolve. They had tried to make me small. They had miscalculated. But in that slow, terrible build, shock, then sadness, then disbelief, then pure, hot anger, I understood the shape of the fight ahead. I would not allow their betrayal to be the last stain on my life. I remember the exact second the balance tipped. It was small at first, a sigh I swallowed, a smile I forced, but it gathered weight like water behind a dam until it could not be held. I was in my kitchen, the kettle long since forgotten on the stove, when the memory of Danielle's laugh at the safe came back so sharp it made me drop the spoon. My mind raced through the ledger of my life, the watch I pawned, the piece of land I signed away, the nights I went without, so Aisha could have more. Each thing was a bead on a rosary of sacrifice, and I counted them until the beads cut into my palms. The counting became a kind of proof against the numbness, proof that I had not been foolish, only hopeful. Grief sat beside me like an old, patient friend. I mourned not only the loss of who I thought my family was, but the loss of the future I had imagined. Quiet dinners, grandchildren at my knees, the small, sacred rituals of old age. That imagined future was now a torn photograph. But grief alone would not move me. Grief would not make them hear me. Anger lived under that grief, low and steady at first, but tonight it rose. I felt it in my palms as a pressure, in the hollow behind my ribs, as if a fist were tapping, impatient. I replayed the moments that had led here, the way my daughter's eyes slid away when my name sounded in the same room as theirs. The betrayal was not a single act. It was an accumulation of small cruelties that proved intent. In that heated silence, I asked myself a question I had avoided for months. What would I have done if I were watching this from the outside? Would I stand for it? No. A simple answer, but it struck me like a light. I would not have. We stood for it. I would have fought. I would have warned. I would have dismantled the lie. I thought about the nights I had spent nursing her fever, the mornings I got up before dawn to be gone while the house still slept, the way I had smiled through dental appointments because I could not afford to complain. Those memories were not bargaining chips to be cashed by a stranger. They were the ledger of my life, and they deserved protection. My hands shook, not from age, but from a new steadying energy, the kind that comes when something in you refuses to be small any longer. I paced the kitchen until the floorboards knew every step of my resolve. Each time my foot hit the wood, it felt like signing my name on a page I would not let them tear out. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw open doors and accuse them in front of neighbors and friends, but shouting into a room filled with lies rarely changes minds. It only reveals your rawness. I needed strategy. I needed patience. I needed to turn the tide without letting them see the hands that turned it. I thought of my father's words, steady, practical warnings about snakes and hands that reach for what they did not plant. He had been a quiet man, not given to drama, but he had known the language of survival. Do not show your teeth unless you are ready to bite, he used to say. Tonight, I understood that meaning fully. My grief shifted into calculation. I listed what I had left that could not be taken without consequence. A contract, an old letter, the names of men who knew the truth about favors owed and debts unpaid. I had kept these things like a farmer stores seed for lean seasons. They were not money in the bank, but they were leverage, the sort that can topple a man who builds his house on other people's labor. Anger became action. I stopped dreaming of what had been and began to map what could be. I called one old friend, the sort of man who owed me more than polite words, and left a message that was shorter than it sounded. I might need you soon. I hid nothing in my movements, yet everything in my intent. I would be patient until opportunity presented itself. There was shame, too, a private, cold shame that I had let someone else define the terms of my family's loyalty. That shame fed the resolve. It would not have the last word. I refused to be a cautionary tale whispered over fence lines. I would write the ending myself. I knelt by the study door that night and felt the worn rug under my knees like a prayer rug. I touched the safe as if it were a relic and not a prize. Then quietly, I made the vow that would move me for the weeks to come. Enough is enough. Not a whisper, not a plea, but a full-throated promise to myself that I would not be erased by greed or silenced by betrayal. I wanted justice, yes, but I wanted something quieter too. The restoration of truth in my daughter's eyes and the knowledge that her choices had consequences. I plotted with a surgeon's calm. I would not act on impulse. I would set the stage. I would gather the threads of proof and the people who could pull them taut. I would let their vanity and haste be the instruments of their undoing. And while the house slept heavy and ordinary, I stood and let the vow settle into my bones. I would take nothing less than the full measure of what they had tried to steal. My dignity, my name, my right to be remembered rightly. When morning came, I was not the same weary man who had gone to bed. My grief remained, a scar I would carry, but beside it was a new face of determination, deliberate, patient, implacable. I walked out that day with a plan quietly shaping in my mind and the taste of resolve, bitter and clean on my tongue. "Enough is enough," I said aloud into the empty kitchen, and it sounded like a bell. I was going to make them regret the night they thought robbing me was a great idea. I did not rush. Revenge, I learned, is an art that punishes haste. So I began with small, careful movements, the sort that looked like the life of an old man going about his day, nothing more. I walked the same routes, kept the same hours, and let them think my mind was as slow as my footsteps. While they relaxed, I worked. First, I separated what was truly valuable from what might be used against me. The small savings that could be easily grabbed went into a safety deposit box under a different name, a name Danielle would never think to check. I counted bills in the kitchen light, folded them into envelopes, and watched the stack grow until the weight felt like insurance. Next, I turned the study into a stage. I bought a cheap, dusty-looking safe from a second-hand shop and left it almost where the old one sat, making sure the lock looked tempting. The real papers I owned, contracts, receipts, the letter from the construction company that still listed unpaid wages, I placed in tidy folders and photographed every page. I made copies, digital and physical, and hid them in places that felt obvious to me, but invisible to a thief. I planted a camera, nothing dramatic, a small lens tucked among books, its red light easily missed by an untrained eye. I set it to send recordings to a burner phone I kept in a kitchen drawer. That phone had no name, no profile, and no history that could be traced back to me. If they moved toward the study again, I wanted proof that couldn't be denied. I called an old friend from the union, Hassan, who still had a reputation that opened doors. I didn't ask for help in front of others. I met him at a tea stall at dawn, talked in understatement. "Hey, keep your ears open," I said. He understood without my spelling it out. Hassan had ways to nudge people, a quiet question in the right ear, a reminder of obligations unpaid. He was my first hidden ally. Then I found a lawyer who owed me a favor from years back. Small kindnesses gather interest. I met him in his office and slid the folder across the desk without flair. "If I give you this," I told him, "and you see fit, make it loud." He nodded, lips thin. He knew what loud could do to a man who depends on silence. We agreed on a signal, one call, and certain papers would begin to move into hands that could not look the other way. Patience was the cruelest part. I rehearsed my face in mirrors, calm, unbothered, the same old man who lost his wife and loved his daughter. I let nights pass and watched as Daniel grew bolder. He showed his teeth in public, flaunted small things, and I noted every step. The more he revealed, the less I had to. I also set traps that were invisible to them. A banker friend made sure certain transactions would flag if moved hastily. A neighbor whose loyalty I had earned by years of lending tools agreed to be at his window on a certain night, ready to testify if needed. Little investments, each one a thread that could be pulled to unravel a lie. I prepared misdirection. A few harmless items, petty cash, an old watch. I left where they could find them and think they'd won. Let them taste victory. Let their arrogance deepen. Thieves are careless when they feel clever. That carelessness would be their undoing. I kept secrets from my daughter. That hurt me more than I like to admit, but some truths are weapons that must stay hidden until they are used. I wrote notes to myself, lists of names, dates, and small reminders. A ledger to keep my memory from betraying me. Each note was folded and hidden in places only an old man who lived his life there would remember. I tested my system. I set the camera to record the study for a week, then checked it at odd hours to ensure it captured movement without being obvious. I walked the routes a thief might take, noting creaks in the floorboards and where a shadow would fall. I learned my house like a general studies a battlefield. Every meeting, every call, every quiet exchange was a piece of the plan. I would not reveal more than necessary to any friend. Compartmentalize, my father's voice said in my ear. Hassan knew some of it. The lawyer knew more. The neighbor knew the least. No single person held the whole design. If one faltered, the others could still carry it forward. Sometimes I sat and imagined how it would look. The smug smile wiped off Danielle's face, the neighbors whispering, the paperwork making a clean, loud sound when dropped into public view. I savored that imagined justice like a man tasting salt after a long fast. But I did not act on that image. I let it keep me steady. The plan had a final piece I kept to myself. A small chain of evidence that would link greed to action. Fingerprints left deliberately. A recorded voice clip from the camera, documents with marks only a greedy man would find valuable. I left bait lines that would look irresistible to someone hungry for easy gain. As days turned to weeks, I watched and waited. They made mistakes in their confidence, a forgotten conversation, a brash comment to a friend, and each one was catalogued and saved. My patience felt like cold iron. The longer it sat in my hand, the sharper its edge became. I practiced silence. Silence can be as loud as shouting if you know how to use it. I let gossip do some of my work. I let the right men hear the right things at the right times. I fed curiosity without giving away the feast. Let them wonder. Let them question their safety. Let them unsettle themselves. And all the while, in the quiet hours when the house creaked and the moon painted the floorboards silver, I repeated my vow. Not in anger now, but in craftsmanship. And to uncover, to expose, and to make sure that what they thought they had stolen would instead become the instrument of their downfall. They thought they could rob me because I was old. They thought kindness was weakness. They did not know how thoroughly an old man can prepare. They did not know that patience is a tool and secrecy its sharp edge. Now I wait with everything in place, allies, evidence, and a plan that unfolds one careful step at a time. I have not revealed all my pieces. I will not. Let them wonder what I am really planning. That uncertainty will be part of their punishment. The night I decided to act, I left the house in darkness and wore the patience of a man twice my age. Daniel came in that evening, thinking the house slumbered. He moved with the arrogance of a man who expects treasure. I pretended to nap in the living room, every muscle coiled, every breath measured. The little camera I had tucked between the spines of old ledgers watched him like a merciless witness. He worked the safe with the confidence of a man who believed he owned time. His hands trembled with greed. When he opened the fake safe and ruffled through its contents, his laugh sounded like permission to the universe. He found the bait I had left, papers that smelled of promise and ruin, exactly the kind of leverage he craved. Unseen, I recorded his whispered calls and the names he mentioned, lines of guilt he thought would vanish with the night. I let him take the bundle and leave because the best traps are those the animal walks into willingly. 2 days later, I set my plan in motion, a call to the lawyer, a text to Hassan, a quiet message to the officer who owed me a favor. The first twist came when a business associate Danielle trusted received a copy of the documents I had photographed. He panicked and called Daniel, and his voice, captured on my recording, sealed the next chapter of their undoing. I invited the neighbors to a false story about a lost cat, knowing curiosity would bring them to their windows. On the appointed night, I played back the camera. Footage on the burner phone right where they could see a screen and not look away. Aisha appeared in the doorway at the same time the neighbor peered in, and the truth landed between them like a thrown stone. Daniel's face, which had always worn ease, broke into a map of shock as his own voice accused him from my phone. He tried to explain, to spin, but the lawyer and the officer stepped forward with documents already notarized and ready. Hassan produced witnesses who remembered loans, favors, and threats Daniel had casually made in confidence. In one swift hour, the arrogance that had swelled him was stripped down to bare fear, pace by pace, fact by fact. They tried to slither out through whispers, but the ledger of evidence I had built, receipts, messages, recorded voices, closed like a book on them. When the handcuffs clicked around Daniel's wrists, the street went quiet in a way I had not felt since my wife's funeral. Aisha's cries were not triumph. They were the sound of a daughter waking to what she had sheltered. I felt no gloating, only a cold, deep relief. Justice delivered not by rage, but by careful, patient truth. They had thought to rob an old man. Instead, they unearthed the map of their own ruin. I walked home that night, holding the weight of what I'd done, knowing the wound would not heal overnight, but certain the rot had been cut away. After the handcuffs clicked shut and the crowd thinned, silence filled the house in a way I had not felt in years. I sat alone in my chair, the old wood creaking beneath me, and let the weight of everything sink in. For so long I had carried anger like a stone in my chest, but now there was only exhaustion. Aisha sat across from me, her eyes red, her hands trembling as though she was the one being punished. I wanted to comfort her, yet I knew the truth I had revealed had shattered more than her marriage. It had shattered her trust. She whispered, "Baba, why didn't you tell me sooner?" And I could only lower my head. Because sometimes, I thought, a father protects his child not by softening the truth, but by waiting until the truth defends itself. The house felt both lighter and lonelier. Justice has a way of cleaning rooms, but leaving echoes behind. In the days that followed, neighbors spoke in hushed tones, some with pity, others with respect. They called me a clever old man, but I did not feel clever. I felt aged, worn, and emptied of fire. My daughter visited often, torn between sorrow and gratitude, and I held her without judgment. I had avenged myself, yes, but revenge is never as sweet as one imagines in the sleepless nights. There is no real joy in watching someone fall. There is only the quiet satisfaction of balance restored. I walked by the river one evening, the sun lowering itself gently into the horizon, and I thought of my late wife. Did I do right? I asked the wind, knowing she would have urged forgiveness, yet forgiveness had not saved us. I realized then that revenge had not been for triumph, but for survival, for dignity, for the truth that could not stay buried. Peace came not in celebration, but in the calm knowledge that I had not been broken. My enemies had underestimated an old man, and in their arrogance they destroyed themselves. Aisha slowly began to rebuild her life, her strength forged in fire, and I stood by her as I always had. We learned together that betrayal leaves scars, but scars are reminders that we endured, not that we were defeated. I carried no hatred for Daniel anymore. Prison walls would teach him what my words never could. What mattered was that my daughter and I still had each other, and no thief could steal that bond. In the end, revenge had given me closure, but it also left me with a lesson carved deep into my bones. Family is sacred, trust is fragile, and greed is the quickest path to ruin. So I say this to anyone who listens. Never mistake kindness for weakness, and never believe age makes a man helpless. For patience, truth, and love are stronger weapons than greed will ever understand.